Hi, welcome to Chad's Silversmithing. Before we get too far into the video, if you wouldn't mind hitting that like button, that really helps to get my channel promoted, and I appreciate it. I would also love it if you leave a comment. I like to hear how you do things. I like suggestions for videos. I like constructive criticism. Those kind of things are great, and I always love learning new things from other people as well. So, one of the things I get asked for a lot is to do some videos about making turquoise rings. So today I'm going to do a multi-stone turquoise ring. I was originally going to do 3 stones, but I'm going to try and break an artistic rule and do a 2-stone piece. Generally people think that it's kind of an, I'm not sure what they call it in art circles, maybe the rule of 3, but odd number components on pieces of art generally look better than even number components. So I'm going to try and break the rule today and see if I can pull one off. Because sometimes you can get by with it, sometimes you can't. So we'll see today. Should be an interesting build. It's sort of traditional, sort of sleek and angular. So we'll see how it turns out. Before we do that, though, I wanted to thank some people. I have this amazing group of patrons over on Patreon, and I am in their debt, not only financially, but for the really nice community that they've created over there. If I don't know how to do something, I know there's almost always someone over there who will know how to do it. And the cool thing is that they share information and ideas and techniques and pieces that they're making and show it to each other. So thank you guys for that. I appreciate that. The other group is my YouTube subscribers. We just passed 13,800, I believe, which is amazing. I never thought we would have this many subscribers when I first started this, but I really appreciate it, and I appreciate the nice comments that you leave too. Sometimes I'm actually very moved by what you say. You know, it's nice to know when someone is finding some value in what you do. So thanks for that. With those things being said, let's get started on this project. This is one of my design idea books, which are available on my merch store if you're interested. I find it super useful to have something to draw up my ideas before I start them. I didn't used to do that, but I think I get a much better outcome when I have some plans in place in advance. It has a nice little dot matrix in the background to help me keep things sort of symmetrical. It's like graph paper. On the back I started putting conversion tables. This one is fractions of an inch to decimals to millimeters, which I find really useful because I'm trying to use the metric system more since it makes more sense for jewelry. So yeah, those are available on my merch store if you're interested. Alright, so I started sketching today. I was feeling like doing something turquoisey, and I originally picked out 3 stones and was going to do something with balls, but I think that's just kind of too traditional. So I finally settled on just using 2. That was so big, and we're going to see if we can get by with that. That's what I was talking about. I made one of the bezels in advance to save time, but oops, I got it upside down. This is a good example. Oh no, I got it. There it is. I was going to say, this is a good example when you have an asymmetrical stone and you go to solder the bottom on your bezel. You want to make sure that you didn't put it on there upside down, because they're not the same either way. And if you solder the bottom on the top here, you won't be able to fit your stone in it. So I found that out the hard way a few times. But these are going to be like this. And I think I'm going to have a little, I don't normally do this, but I'm going to have a little lip sticking out of the sheet. And because of that, whereas I might normally use a really thin sheet for the backing because I'm going to reinforce it with other decorations and stuff, on this one, since I want a little bit sticking out on the outside edge, I need something a little bit thicker. Thin stuff like 26 is going to end up being like almost sharp once you polish it. So I'm going to use some 18 gauge, which is relatively thick and heavy. So I think I have a little bit left here. I need to order some more, but I think that's wide enough to get that from. So we'll use this little chunk here of 18 gauge. I'm going to put some silver balls in between them, kind of biggest at the center and then tapering down smaller. I think that'll be kind of pretty. So that'll retain some kind of traditional looks. But also, I'm going to take some, I think 10 gauge square and flatten it with my rolling mill, or by pounding it, I'm not sure which. Either way would work just fine. And then I'm going to shape it so it fits in those little notches and kind of fills it in and creates kind of a more of a homogeneous shape there. And I think I may oxidize this at the end so the little cracks are darker, and that makes the turquoise stand out. So I'm not sure where this turquoise is from. It's relatively greenish with brown matrix. So anybody who's a turquoise expert, maybe you can suggest where these came from. It's pretty either way though. So for the band, I'm going to use 12 gauge square, 3 pieces. I haven't decided if I'm going to do them parallel like that or if I'm going to do them tapered. I may do them parallel like that, which will create a different challenge, but we'll deal with that when we come to it. So we'll do the head first. So we'll start by making a bezel, and then we'll make some silver balls, and then we'll make these things on either side, and then we'll start assembling it, and then we'll do the band last. 18 gauge sheet is 1.02 millimeters thick. 12 gauge square wire, which we're going to use for the band, is 2.01 millimeters wide. For these things, I said 10 gauge flattened. Before you flatten it, it's 2.59 millimeters, I think. And then I'm using 3/16 inch bezel strip made out of fine silver. 3/16 is 4.76 millimeters. And I'm using 26 gauge, which is 0.41 millimeters. So let's get started on this bezel here. Here's the stuff. I usually keep 26 and 28 around. I like the slightly thicker stuff. It's just a little more durable. So let's start by doing a sharp corner so that the end of it is going to end up being right here where we meet, or thereabouts. So I'm going to make a bend right here. Oh, and I think this project is probably, you know, a beginner project for someone who's got a little bit of experience. So I'm probably going to categorize it as beginner, because there's nothing technically complex here. But having had a little bit of soldering practice would help to make this a little bit easier, probably. So I wouldn't make this my first piece, but if you've made 10 or 12 pieces of jewelry already, this might be an appropriate one to try. So I'm trying to get this as tight as I possibly can. I want to have a lot of, especially with sharp corners, you don't want to have a lot of excess bezel. So you want your bezel to be snug, because when you go to bend those bits of bezel over the corners when you're setting your stone, you don't want to have too much excess metal there, because it's hard to get it to compress into that space. I know I repeat myself a lot, but sometimes people this might be the first videos that they saw that I've done, so I figured it doesn't hurt to reiterate things like that. Normally I make these into rectangles when I go to soldering, but in order to preserve these angles where I have them pretty well placed, I think I'll just leave it as a triangle. File the end here, and then we'll solder it together. If you haven't been to my channel before, I use hard silver sheet solder, which looks like this. I use a liquid flux that I dribble on with one of these little eyedropper bottles. Occasionally I'll spray it on with the sprayer as well. Depends on the situation. But you're doing a bezel, sometimes pushing it past each other so that they're springing together tightly. That'll give you forward pressure. So when the metal relaxes under the heat, which it generally does, it won't pull apart. You gotta get them to where they're staying together though. If you hear any strange noises in the background, that's our dog has a kind of an acute nasal issue, She sometimes makes some sniffy noises. The torch I use is a Silversmith model, which is their acetylene air torch, and I really like it. I'm going to be careful not to force this in until I have it shaped better, because I could break the tip off of the stone. It's always a bummer when you have something that's shaped uniquely and you don't have a replacement. If you break it, you're kind of out of luck. I think we did okay on the size. It's not so tight that it's dangerous to the stone, but it's relatively snug. Now, I think let's make some silver balls with some scrap. The best way to make silver balls that I've ever found is on a charcoal block. It seems to make better balls. Now, if you want to make a whole bunch of the same size balls, you can just cut the same length pieces off some scrap wire. You know, like you got some 18 gauge here, and just cut a whole bunch the same length, and they'll be the same. But I wanted these ones to taper just a little bit, the biggest in the middle, and gradually get smaller. So let's do one that's not like that big. Then we'll do one that's a little bit shorter. I'm not doing this very effectively today. And since there's going to be one big one in the center, and then they're going to gradually get smaller, let's do 2 of each. The next one will be a little bit smaller. So I think what I'm going to do is extend these lines out like this, so I can kind of see where on the sheet it should be. So let's find the center between those two, and that's where we'll put the big one. That's pretty close to the center right there. So we'll solder one of those on there, and then we'll start adding more along the line. Then we'll put those bezels on, I think. So one way to do this that's pretty easy is I could flux these balls and just pick a little bit of solder on each one, and I might for this first one, but after that I might not need to. So I just want to make sure that one's in the right place. So let's do that. I have a little bit of solder here. I'm just going to flux this. If you haven't seen pick soldering, I'll put a link up here. It's a really useful skill. I think it can take you to a whole different level as far as metal smithing. Okay, let's get that ball fluxed. Hoping that's in there. We'll just pick up a little bit of solder here from that I had earlier. Just jump it on there. So when you're soldering two things that are have a big difference in mass, most of the heat needs to go on the big piece first, because the other piece, the small piece, like that ball, you can see the solder is already liquefied just by being close to the flame here. But I need to, if I want it to really stick to that sheet, I need to get the sheet up to the 1450 degrees that hard silver melts at. So I'm watching for an actual seam to form between them, which just happened there. Pick your ball there so that make sure it's on there good. Cut a little bit more solder. Now you could just lean a piece of solder on there if you want to, but I'm going to continue doing the pick soldering thing, because that's kind of what I'm used to. The real trick with pick soldering is having enough patience to wait until you know both pieces that you're trying to solder together have reached the temperature that the solder flows at. Of course, the 18 gauge sheet down here is pretty thick stuff. Okay, let's cool that off and see if everything stays on there. Yeah, now you gotta redo it if your balls fall off when you just stick it in the pickle safe. So I think I'm going to take a little neck break because I've been hunching over and getting a little sore, so I'll be back in a few minutes. Alright, rested my back a bit. Now let's cut some solder and let's solder these bezels down. Kind of positioned them where I wanted them. So now I'm just going to make sure that these pieces of solder are touching the side and the bottom. Sometimes when you start heating them, if they're not quite touching, the flux will go through kind of a gooey stage. And when it's in that stage, you can kind of slide them up against the side and make sure they're touching and they'll stay there. Alright, let's give it a try. Again, most of that mass is in that sheet on the bottom, so if you need to elevate it and heat from the bottom, that's a good idea sometimes when you have a real thick sheet. Okay, I'm going to cool this off and we'll take a peek at it and see how it turned out. I think I got them both down okay. So I think I can just kind of like cut that off like there. So I'm just going to round it out. And then we'll take a look at it and see how it looks. So. Alright, I'm going to file that up and make it a little smoother. So I did a little testing by pounding part of this piece of 10 gauge square wire flat on my bench clock, and I think it's going to be just fine. I was going to do it through the rolling mill, but I really wanted to flatten it so it's spread out, because it seems like when you roll it through the rolling mill, it elongates it more than widens it. So, and I wanted it to be a little bit wider. I could have just cut some 18 gauge sheet or something like that. So I looked at the side that was a little bit wider there. And I think if I file this, I'll be able to get it to lay right in there nicely. Good proportions. So all I did was I took it, let me find that other piece, where did you go? There you are. And I used my chasing hammer to just kind of pound it flat. See if that's big enough for this smaller side. I think that is. So, alright, so now I'm just going to take a moment and neaten this up with a file, and then we'll start getting the shape right. So I should probably anneal these two, because pounding it makes it really hard through a process called work hardening. Twisting, pounding, stretching, bending, any of that kind of stuff makes your piece really stiff and springy. I'm going to go ahead and anneal these so they're a little easier to work with. A good starting place would be to file this flat. So I'm going to do that, since it's not perfectly flat, since I was pounding haphazardly, which is useful and cathartic. Could clamp this in a miter vice jig, that might help do that. Use it not so much to line it up with the edge, but just to hold it, since it's kind of hard to hold something like that. Straight. Hopefully. Okay. I'm going to use the marker to kind of mark angles that I want to do here. So if I take that straight edge, I don't want this to be right up against there. I want there to be a little space between the two. So I think if we solder it on like that, then we can just trim it off right at the edge there. Make sure we got a nice clean seam and just, you know, have it kind of stick up a little bit and be an accent. You could just lay it on here if you wanted to. It'll be interesting to see if we got a good seam there or not. So I don't think it's perfectly on there. So let's use one of these magnesia blocks. If I push this down in there, if it's resting on the surface, I can just pick a little bit more in there like that. So let's make sure we have some solder. So since the other side stuck to the edge there, I'm just going to even it up. So this one's soldered to the side of the bezel as well, on the other side. Just for consistency's sake. That wasn't my original plan, but you know, sometimes things go awry. Okay, so I am going to cut off the excess and file it so it matches smoothly there. So I'll be right back. I got that cleaned up and it's tickling, and I cut myself 3 pieces of 12 gauge square wire, and I cut them to where they will equate to about a size 8.5 when I put them on the bottom of this. Now one of the things I wanted to do on this one is I wanted to have parallel bands that are separated. And you could probably balance them up there and do that, but it's going to be difficult to do. So I'm actually going to temporarily attach these together. And I think the way that I'll do that is I'll just solder a piece of square wire across them to keep them in the same kind of situation. Maybe in 2 spots. Maybe I should do it in 2 spots. like a fence. Alright, now we can just shape it around the handle. Probably would. It's going to be pretty hard to bend because it's 3 pieces of 12 gauge square, so you're probably going to have to do some pounding. I got them pretty well shaped. Now I'm going to file them so they're flat on the top here so that I can just set it right on the back of that head of the ring. And then we'll solder it down and then we'll trim these off. We should be ready to pickle it and then eventually polish it once it's cleaned up a little bit. So I'm going to file this. Because I'm filing against the way it is, I'm going to have to keep re-straightening it probably. Do it this way, but then it's going to catch on the ones facing you. So I'm just going to kind of keep going back and forth from one side to the other. You could also lay it on some sandpaper that was taped to your table and just do it that way. But so I'll be right back. Alright, so I have that bent and filed down flat. I'm going to go ahead and solder it on here. I pushed it into the magnesia block again to prevent any kind of things moving on me. And we're getting quite a bit of mass here, so it may take a minute to get this heated up. So most of the heat on this particular one is going to go in the base there because that's going to be the hardest area of the ring to heat. So the rings up top here will get up to temperature pretty readily. So I'll just cut these off and then I'll file away the excess. Alright, I'll get that cleaned up and pickled. So a couple of things that happened off camera. I had one of my band sides come undone, so I had to resolder it and then repickle it a little while longer. And this was after I had already done a lot of polishing. So, other things. I went ahead and set this one. I put this one in, but I haven't set it yet. Sometimes when these corners are really sharp, I thin out the top edge so there's less material to bend over. But through the polishing process, these ones thinned out enough, I think. So we'll kind of push those up in the corners. I use my flat side of my chain nose pliers to be my bezel pusher. Gives me good leverage. Of course, the last stage is called burnishing. And I'm going to use the rounded outer part here. Kind of rub that top edge with some force. So the only thing I'm going to do now is I'm going to do a little bit of cleanup at the top here with the rotary tool probably. It's a little hard to get between these where the balls are, so I'm going to try and shine those up a little bit more. But overall I think I like it. It's sort of a modern take on a traditional style. I will get it all cleaned up and we'll do some final pictures at the end. Okay, well that was the two-stone turquoise ring. I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, make sure to hit the like button before you leave. And take a moment and check out some of my other videos. I have 360 or 370 videos now on my main page there. You can also go to my playlist page where they're kind of split into different categories, so it might make it easier to navigate that many videos, but there's a lot of content there. There's almost certainly something that you'll like besides this one, so check them out. Subscribe to my channel. I'd love to have you as a subscriber, and don't forget to hit the video description down below. There's some important links, like a link to a video about safety. There's a link to my merch store if you want to get yourself one of those nice design idea books. There's a link to that ebook if you want to get that. That's a great resource for having a whole bunch of projects right at your fingertips. And there's even a link to my Patreon site if you want to find out more about that. That's a great place. So, all right, well, thank you for visiting. I hope you enjoyed the video. Take care. Happy silversmithing.